On June 20th, Morphew was taken into custody in Maricopa County, Arizona. This comes nearly 2 years after Denver 7 was the only station alongside investigators as they discovered his missing wife's remains just outside of the town of Moffett. New details from a grand jury indictment say Barry was the last known person to see her alive. And during Suzanne Morphew's autopsy, an animal tranquilizer known as BAM was found in her bones. The indictment claims that Barry was a deer farmer and the only private citizen living in that entire area of the state that had access to BAM at the time of his wife's disappearance.
The case against Barry Morphew has been a pendulum swing. At one point, he was arrested, and then those charges were dismissed, and he was released, and then he was charged again and put behind bars. And now he has been asking to get out. Well, tonight he has been released from custody. And here's what the lead up was. Let's listen back to a September 2nd hearing where he was asking for a reduced bond.
In weighing each of these factors and making an assessment of Mr. Morphew's specific situation, I declined to reduce his bail, but I am going to modify his bond. I'm going to modify his bond to a cash surety or property bond. In this district, we often set bond at a higher surety or property option with a lesser cash-only option, but I won't be doing that in this case. The reason why is because if Mr. Morphew posts bond through a surety and then absconds, he not only has $300,000 on the line, but there's also a bail bonds person who would be tracking him down. And if he chose to post a cash-only option, then he would have $3 million on the line. If Mr. Morphew posts bond, the added conditions are that Mr. Morphew may not leave the state of Colorado for any reason. Mr. Morphew will have a GPS monitor placed on him before he is released, and he may not leave his home for any reason except for medical emergencies, to attend medical appointments, to meet with his attorneys, or to attend court. The GPS monitor company shall submit a report to the court at least monthly and shall report any violation, including tampering with the monitor or failing to keep it charged immediately. Mr. Morphew will surrender any passports he has. He will also use only the name Barry Morphew in any personal, legal, and business dealings, and he may not petition to change his name legally during the pendency of this case. He may only drive vehicles that are properly registered to him and that comply with the Colorado Department of Revenue's rules. And finally, Mr. Morphew shall comply with the mandatory protection orders that I'll be issuing here momentarily, and we'll advise Mr. Morphew about in a few minutes.
So cash only to a cash surety bail. Alamosa County Sheriff's Office told us this. Barry Morphew has posted bond and has been released from our county jail. No further information will be provided. Let's bring back in the think tank. We have Josh Bolsrud, Claudia King, and Lauren Vellucci in with us. Josh, I got to start with you on this one. Can you explain what happened here? He had a $3 million bond, and because of that shift, we're presuming that he was able to pay it because now he was only required to pay a lot less.
Yeah, just to give the listeners a little bit of context, there's two different types of bond that exist in our judicial system. You have a cash-only bond, meaning that you literally have to come up with, in this case, $3 million if you're going to be released. Or, as the judge did here, you have a secured appearance bond or a surety bond, which allows you to come up with either 10 or 20% and then have the collateral available to a bond company for the remaining amount. But the reason why the judge did this is, number one, his attorney brought this up. During the last trial, during the last case, he had a bond of $500,000, and he was able to post it. And he attended and he was at every single court proceeding. He didn't miss an appointment with pretrial services. He followed all the court rules. So he has a good track record. Also, I'm not necessarily familiar with his criminal history, but there's been no allegation that he's committed any other crime since 2020. So the judge has to consider, is he a substantial flight risk and is he a substantial danger to the community? And, having a $300,000 secured, a $3 million secured appearance bond is still pretty hefty. And based on how the defendant was in the last case, that I think that this is probably a pretty typical result in a case like this.
Typical result. We have a lot of terms there. Lauren, terms of this house arrest that he's under. He can't have drugs or alcohol. He can't use a fake name. Do you think that this is sufficient? What do you think about him being out based on the charges that he's facing?
Yeah, I personally think he's low risk to hurt anyone in the community. I just struggle with it because I know the absolute suffering that Suzanne went through being murdered in this manner. She didn't die quickly. So I understand the law and the reason for bond. So I do think it was appropriate, but I also have a moral fight with this one because of the conditions that she died under.
Let's listen to some details that include the evidence that's against Barry Morphew, including this sedative evidence that police have.
Insofar as the indictment, Your Honor, as the court knows, that is a cherry-picked piece of narrative that has been created exclusively by the district attorney. The BAM that the district attorney mentions that Mr. Morphew had access to, I want to be clear on, was prescribed to him in the state of Indiana in 2018. Mr. Morphew has not had access to BAM since 2018.
The remains of Suzanne Morphew after an autopsy contained a chemical compound that Mr. Morphew had almost exclusive access to, tying him directly to the remains of his wife. The case in 2021 was arguably entirely circumstantial with no body. This case is very different.
Claudia King, they're saying there that they've got almost a fingerprint with this sedative because he was the only one who was licensed to have it in that area. But I gotta say, with charges being brought and dropped and now even him being out on bond and not being deemed a flight risk, do you think the prosecution's case is extremely strong?
I think it's definitely stronger than it was previously in 2021, and a lot of that does have to do with this sedative because they found her body and they were able to conclusively say that it was in her body. It is a very circumstantial case, though, but I look at that kind of like a patchwork quilt. So you have all these different squares that look silly by themselves or don't mean much, but when you put them all together, it shows what really happened. And I do think that the prosecution has a strong case at this point.
Josh, in terms of the judge allowing him to be out on bond, essentially by lowering it, it does allow him to have better access to being able to get out. Does that say anything to the strength of the case, or is it solely focused? Because we see all the time that prosecutors come in and talk about the details of the crime versus just whether they're a flight risk and whether they will reoffend.
So the strength of the government's case is always a consideration, but it carries the least amount of weight in these bond release hearings. Remember, this isn't a trial. This is just a hearing to evaluate whether or not this person, again, is a substantial danger to the community or a substantial flight risk. And I do agree with my colleague Claudia that this is a much stronger case than it was the first time around because they actually have a body. And through the forensics, they were able to determine that it had traces of that tranquilizer that only he had access to. So it's going to be really interesting to see how his defense tries to explain that away.
Absolutely. Our thanks to the think tank for all of that analysis this hour. Josh Colesrud, Claudia King, and Lauren Vellucci. We do have to get to our break.